Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session 35 of our course on organizational theory and design. And as you know, in the last session we were discussing about the decision-making process, and we mentioned that decision-making in organization occurs at individual level, and it also occurs at group and departmental level and at the overall organizational level. Now, in the last sessions, we discussed the mechanisms of how individuals make decisions, how they use the rationality approach, the bounded rationality approach, and the intuitive decision making, which occurs with experience and which is shaped and which is helped by the bounded rationality which is available to us as human beings. Now, in this session, we are going to introduce the concept of organizational decision making, where not one but multiple players are involved. So the first major difference of organizational and individual decision making is that organizational decision making is not done on individual basis. It might be true for very small organizations and in situations where the time is very less, the environmental demands are too extreme, that an individual makes a decision which becomes an organizational decision. But normally, the process of organizational decision is much more complex, much more broader, much more intricate than the process of individual decision making. And I am not saying that individual decision making process is fully understood. How we make decisions in our mind, how we use our previous knowledge, how the mental schemas, the mental maps are formed, why some people can make good decisions, why some people can use the notion of bounded rationality to their advantage and can have intuitive and visionary decision making. These things are not clearly understood. But the breadth and scope of organizational decision making and the complexity and the number of people involved in it make it even more complex than individual decision making. Now, in organizational decision making, the problem identification and the problem solution stages are the same as what we saw for the individual decision making. Through our accumulated experience, knowledge, information gathering, common sense, we identify the problems, and then we saw that various alternatives are presented, the best alternative is chosen. The same happens in organizational decision making, but the scope, the level, the breadth is different, because the stages of problem identification and solution involve many departments, not one individual, not one department, but many departments. For example, suppose we are a company and we are encountering the problem of decrease in sales, decline in sales for the last 2 or 3 quarters successively. Now, to identify this problem, if the focus is only kept on sales department, then it is quite possible that we might miss the real problem, because sales people are probably not causing it. And one approach could be that you concentrate on sales people and you find out that the real problem is in sales department. But if you find out that the real problem is not in sales department, but in some other department, and you want to find out as a company chief or as a chief executive officer or as a top manager, you want to find out where the problem is, then you will have to do a problem identification survey or a problem identification meetings involving other departments like marketing, like production, like design, like engineering. Those departments will sit together and their first job will be to identify why sales are falling. They might blame salesmen, salespeople might blame that we are not properly trained, and the production department might say that we are making products which the design is giving us. Design might say we are not getting enough ideas from R&D or finances from finance. So this will happen. But ultimately, after the finger pointing or the blame game is finished, the real problem is usually identified through this level of discussion. And some responsibility is distributed across 2 or 3 departments. Now, when it comes to solving this problem, again, these departments and the top managements will sit together and will look for various alternatives which are available to solve this problem. For example, if the problem is mainly occurring because of sales, then they might be given some extra training. They might be provided some more skills. For that, if the company has an in-house HR department and in-house training managers, then the training managers, the training department will coordinate with salespeople and they will initiate training programs which will be monitored. Their impact on the performance of salespeople will be monitored. So that is one way of doing it. And the assumption is that the problem lies with salespeople. But if the problem is somewhere else in the company, or maybe somewhere outside the company, in that case, the departmental meetings will provide alternatives, and they can involve customers, they can involve competitors, they can involve other organizations, so that the best possible solutions, the best possible alternatives are generated, and the best possible one alternative is picked which will be the most suitable for that particular problem which needs a decision making. So problem identification and solution stage, we have seen, involves not only many departments but also now the problem is that it's not that those departments will sit together and will agree with each other. We have already seen that all the departments will have their own viewpoints because they come from different backgrounds. They have different perceptions about the particular problems of falling sales. They have their own ideas about it. Therefore, there will be turbulence when they will sit together because their viewpoints will differ. And it is quite possible that there might be conflict in the beginning. So that is why organizational decision making involves a lot of skill from the people who are conducting it, because they need to coordinate and they need to avoid the conflict. Paradigm is fine, it can happen, but the meetings and the problem identification stage should not turn into confrontation. So it's not only the departments and that the departments have different viewpoints, but as I said, even other organizations can be involved in the process of problem identification and problem solution when it comes to organizational decision making. Other organizations can be similar, other organizations, or maybe competitors, or maybe suppliers, or maybe some other organizations, which stakeholder organizations which are working with the company. So it is possible that their opinion and their perceptions also included in the problem identification and then finally the fixing stage. And many factors have been identified which affect the process of organizational decision making. And those factors will include, first of all, the structure of the company. Now, structure of a company, as we know, is actually a mechanism through which people communicate with each other. It is an expression of the reporting relationship which occurs in a company. The internal structure can facilitate the process of problem identification and solution, or it can also hinder the same process. For example, if the company has a horizontal structure and departments frequently interact with each other, now in that case, problem identification and solution stages will be easier to handle than in a company which has a tall vertical structure, where departments do not interact with each other very frequently because they don't find the need to do so. where departments live in their own boundaries, when these people who are not used to interacting with each other for finding common problems and for finding common solutions, then in those circumstances, chances are that there could be conflict. So therefore, structure of the company will become an important variable in determining whether the organizational decision making will be smooth or whether it will be fraught with some difficulties and problems. Because the horizontal structure companies are used to with the idea of coordination, meetings, cross-functional teams. Therefore, in that type of structure, the organizational decision making is naturally collaborative, because in horizontal organizations which are striving to become learning organizations, the main values in those organizations are those of trust and knowledge sharing. The knowledge sharing would also employ the sharing of various problems which are encountering the organization. So therefore, in a learning organization or a flat structured company, the organizational decision making will be more quick and smooth. So one factor we have identified which has importance in determining the speed, the pace, even the quality of organizational decision making, because if, as I said, if the company is used to with having meetings and lateral horizontal links are already present in the structure of the company, then those people will have a culture which encourages common discussion, which encourages collective problem identification, which encourages collective problem solving. But in a culture which does not encourage that, because of structure, this process could be cumbersome, full of conflicts, full of confrontations. So structure is one important moderating variable. The other important variable which affects the process of organizational decision making is the stability or instability of external environment. Suppose the external environment is stable, and if the external environment is stable, then obviously the structure of the company will not be very complicated, will not be very complex, and it will not be ideally suited for coordination. It will be suited for control. So a stable environment will probably encourage organizational decision making. In the same way, it will impede rather than encourage the organizational decision making, as we saw in a vertical structure. But if the environment is unstable, if there is instability in environment, then the company with a structure which is countering that complexity in the environment, is most probably horizontal structure, will again be in a better position to tackle the issue of coordination in finding out the real problem and in finding out the various alternatives to solve that problem, and then finally coming up with the best solution to address that issue. So environmental stability and instability, the internal structure of the organizations, and many other minor variables like the morale of the employees, the commitment of top management, all these, the culture of the company. The culture obviously is resulting from putting the structure and design into action. If we put the design and structure into action in the spirit of organizational values, we get the design of a company. So design itself will become a facilitating or hindering process in the organizational decision making. But it is also important to note, it should not be taken as if tall vertical structures and stable environments will hinder organizational decision making. The difference is that in a structure which is relatively simple and tall, most of the time the organization will face programmed problems. Programmed problems, as we discussed last time, are those problems which are repetitive, which occur again and again, and for which there are established ways of solving them. Whereas in companies with organic design and horizontal structure and unstable, turbulent environment, the nature of problems which that company will encounter will not be programmed problems, will be most probably complex and non-programmed problems. Therefore, we cannot say that a tall structure will hinder the process of organizational decision making. It will facilitate the process of programmed organizational decision making. And similarly, the non-programmed complex problems are better solved at an organizational level if the structure is horizontal and the environment is unstable. So this needs to be understood because it is important to link the nature of problem, whether it is programmed or unprogrammed, with the structure and the environment of that organization. Because if we understand that in mechanistic design companies, most of the problems which will occur will be programmed, we can visualize that in mechanistic design companies, the organizational decision making process will not be hindered because problems are occurring which are routine problems, repetitive problems. But the whole organization will be involved in a different way, in a different capacity. And that way or capacity will be very different if we compare it with an organic design company where most of the problems which are occurring are complex issues which involve coordination, and coordination mechanisms already exist in the organic design. So in both organic and mechanistic designs, the organizational decision making occurs across organization, but the process and the way of doing it is different because the nature of problems are different. And similarly, we can say that in departments like R&D, problems will mostly be non-programmed, unstructured problems, complex, novel problems. And in an accounts department or a personnel and admin department, mostly the problems would be programmed, routine, repetitive problems. So it is not only the organization, but also the nature of the department, the nature of its technology, whether it is routine or non-routine, which will decide how to solve the problem at a group level or an organizational level. So basically, 4 types of organizational decision-making processes have been identified in the literature. And those 4 types include management science approach, the Carnegie model, based on the famous writer Dale Carnegie, the incremental decision process model, and the garbage can model. Now, in today's session, we will discuss in some detail the management science approach to solving organizational decision-making problems, or management science approach, how it works to solve or how it works to help an organization decides its issue on organization level. The management science approach can be compared with the rational decision-making approach at individual level. And if you remember from our last session, the rational decision-making approach demanded that the individual who is making that decision should have access to almost all the information available on the issue, so that he can then analyze the issue at hand after identifying the problem, gathering information through data or through interviews or through qualitative or quantitative data, then forming sets of alternatives, and then choosing one best alternative. This is exactly what management science approach does at the organizational level. But to understand the management science approach better, it will be useful at this stage if we look into the history of management science approach. The management science approach developed and flourished, or we can say it came into being during the World War II. Because during World War II, complex problems I will give you examples of what those complex problems were. But during World War II, and to solve those complex military problems, the concepts of mathematics, physics, chemistry, they were first time applied to solve non-scientific problems occurring in an organization. Now, the concepts, what were those concepts? We will understand them better if I give you an example. And that example will also highlight and illustrate to you the level of complexity which is involved in management science approach and the level of analysis and the birth of, in fact, the beginning of analysis and the beginning of planning at organizational level in the history of organizations takes a start from World War II. I give you an example of, say, torpedo trying to sink vessel. Now, we know that during Second World War, torpedoes were used to sink vessels, aircrafts were used to bomb, and quite precisely. And till that time, there was no way that complex issues could be solved in a scientific manner. और जो example मैं आपको दे रहा हूँ, the example of a torpedo sinking a vessel. First of all, look at the number of variables which are involved in the calculations. For example, if a torpedo is aiming, एक तो है ना आप, you take a target aim and you hit your target. Like you take a target aim through a gun or through any other device, but when you are trying to sink a vessel through a torpedo, then obviously you can't take a target aim. You have to calculate where your target is, and then you have to fire at the right time so that the torpedo actually hits the vessel at an appropriate place and sinks it. Now, the complexity of the problem is what I am trying to highlight. Look at the variables involved which need to be exactly known and calculated if the torpedo is going to hit its target. कौन से हैं variable? Number one is the speed. Speed of what? Speed of that moving vessel and speed of this torpedo. And in what direction is the vessel moving? And in which direction the torpedo needs to be fired so that it meets the target in its center or at the desired spot. तो आप अपने ज़हन में ज़रा complexity को सामने रखते रहें. And also consider that we are talking of 1940s when the technology was just, in fact, when the management science approach was beginning to flourish and various technologies were being brought together to solve issues. तो एक तो speed हो गई, उसके बाद the time. How much time will it take for this torpedo to hit the vessel if it continues to move in that particular direction with that particular speed? So now contingencies and sensitivities are also appearing. What if the ship or vessel takes a turn, or what if a high tide comes and pushes the vessel a bit on the right or the left, or decreases or increases its speed? All these discontinuities are also included, need to be included in the calculations, otherwise the targets will be missed. And when we are talking about speed and time, so definitely we cannot forget the variable of distance. So we are talking about speed, we are talking about distance, we are talking about time. That all seems quite linear. But we are not trying to sink a vessel in a laboratory under controlled conditions. We are talking of sinking a vessel in real life situation in the middle of an ocean where there could be storm, where there could be rain, where there could be gales of winds. So there are other factors need to be taken into account, like wind speed, because wind speed will have a direct effect on the speed of the ship, on the direction of the ship. So wind की जो speed है, that also enters into the calculation of this particular issue where we are trying to hit a vessel with a torpedo and we have seen that there are various variables involved, and now we have added one more variable, which is the speed of the wind. Also, what size of the shell to be used? Torpedo, in fact, the word मैंने use किया, it might be slightly technically different, but what is the size of that, or what is the magnitude of that particular device which is going to sink the ship? It will again be linked with the distance between the target and torpedo, the distance, the time which will be taken for this shell to travel. So all these things will determine what shell size will be most suitable. What will be the various, we need to also calculate the various curvatures, the various angles. So you can see that there is a host of mathematical calculations involved in doing so. And remember, in those times there were no computers which could assimilate and collect all this data and then under a formula could calculate that. There were no calculators even available at that time. So all this was done manually, and during hit and trial tha, sometimes it succeeded, sometimes it did not. But during this period of hit and trial, when the various concepts of physics and operational quantitative methods and mathematics and chemistry were brought together, a new science emerged, a new science of solving military problems emerged, which was quickly grabbed by other institutions and other companies. Because for the first time, Max Weber obviously is the father of organizational theory, as they say, but for the first time, organizations became hopeful that their mega problems and their mega issues can be solved through a quantitative scientific approach. And the analysts, the creed or the breed of analyst was then actually born, because when the analysts jumped into it, they gave a head start to management sciences, and very quickly we saw that during the World War, radars started replacing humans as the main targeting device, and many other activities and many other discoveries of doing things technically occurred because of this management science approach. Because military took the help of scientists and mathematicians, and it was a result of their extreme hard work in extreme adverse conditions that they were able to develop and initiate this important concept of management science approach, which we use till today. Now, this approach then diffused from military into other institutions after the World War, into the other corporations and businesses, and also immediately after the World War, most of the business schools of the world, they also grabbed this management science approach, and they started to develop techniques, and they started to study the whole concept systematically. They started doing management research on it, and a new discipline, a new paradigm of management science approach to solve organizational decision problems was born. And then companies started taking advantage of this management science approach, and they started applying it on their organizational issues. I gave you an example of how military used management science approach. Will also give you some examples organizations use management science approach in dealing with their problems. Now, when the approach was taken up by business schools and consultants and analysts, it was further refined. Many frameworks were added into it. It was heavily based on mathematical and natural science concepts. So, some examples where management science approach has solved organizational problems and still solves the organizational problems. I will give you some examples so that it becomes clear in your mind that when is that we apply this management science approach. For example, if you are planning to open a shop or an office or a factory, the first thing which comes to your mind is, where will be my business located? So how will I find the right spot for my business? That is one example of management science approach. Especially if a company, established company, is planning to have another plant, they will make many calculations. How much finances will be required? Because each spot will have different lease expense or rent expense or property expense attached with it. So the financial investments required. Then each spot will also be having different potentials for generating revenues or sales. So the 3 or 4 spots which are in your mind or which are in the mind of your company, they will be analyzed differently. 4 scenarios will be built, and it will be seen that in scenario A, where the shop or the office is located in the south or west or north, this will be the stream of revenues, this will be the initial investment required, this will be the stream of expenses. Then similarly, this analysis will be repeated for all the 3 scenarios, and then the investment analysis, the net present value analysis, the rate of return analysis, the beta analysis, the risk analysis, you name it. I mean, there are so many now that you can understand that this simple, it is not simple problem, but it looks simple, of where to open my business will involve so much quantitative information gathering and then solving. This is one example where management science approach is used to its fullest. Also, we test market a new product. Test marketing a new product is a typical example of management science approach, because here you are combining, you are scientifically studying the response to a new product. You can unscientifically do it. You can simply show that product to people and you can ask them to use it and then take their opinion without recording it. Just listen to them and form a generalized opinion. But this approach will obviously not really prepare you to launch your product, because you can miss some important insights or important feedback from your customers. So you show them the product, you test market it by taking their feedback in a codified form, by recording their feedback on surveys, questionnaires, or by inviting them to a focus group, generating a discussion, recording that discussion and then listening to it later on, and then listening to rich qualitative feedback which you get, or by having consumer panels, or by discussing with them one-to-one. But all of this is recorded carefully. And then the data which you have collected, various forms of data, whether it is quantitative or qualitative, is then reduced under the techniques of data reduction, which is also a mathematical and statistical approach. Because if we don't reduce data, it will not make any sense to us. It will not be converted into useful information and useful knowledge. Then we put it into a context, and then we make some sense of it. Then we decide whether this new product is to be launched in this area or not. So that whole approach, which involves so much complexity, which involves so much statistical and mathematical concepts and their applications, is also an example of how management science approach helps solving an organizational issue. Similarly, imagine that you are an oil exploring company and you are considering to explore or drill oil from the deserts of Balochistan. You need to, the decision of drilling for oil involves extensive calculation. Extensive calculation about the land, the topography, the the temperatures, the humidities, the depths to which you want to drill, these and the hydraulic pressures, the calculations will be huge. That is also an application of management science approach. Even distribution of goods, distribution of products. You will need to calculate how many distributors do I need, depending on where do I want to reach, how much commission will I pay them, what will that what sort of impact will that have on my income statement. You will make various trade-offs. Trade-offs, opportunity cost analysis are all the examples of management science approach. Now, this management science approach is becoming more and more complex and more sophisticated and more useful because of the advent of supporting technology of computers, the PCs, the calculators, the calculating devices, the mobile computing. Now you can compute with your mobile phone, you can compute with your PC, you can now, with so much infrastructure available, this management science approach is used even to, not only that it is used more, but that it is used to better advantage of the organizations, because now they can really refine their information, they can collect more information, they can analyze it better in a better way, and they can interpret it in a better way. And similarly, the modern problems of scheduling of airline employees, for example, or scheduling of airline aircraft schedules themselves, or scheduling of ambulance technicians, or scheduling of telephone operators or the radar operators. These are all examples of management science approach because they involve sophisticated calculations, sophisticated technology. Imagine a radar operator sitting in some busy airport of the world where landings are taking place, takeoffs are taking place, and he is doing all that with the support of technology, which is based on many calculations of mathematical and statistical calculations, and then converting those into pictorials, and the radar person is looking at those pictorials and is also understanding them, interpreting them. The driving of a car or the flying of an aircraft itself is an example of management science approach, but in that way that it is too technical. But when organizational problems are solved using huge quantities of data, using different variables and huge number of variables, especially with the advent of computers and then with the advent of many programs which can reduce data, which can give data a meaningful shape, the concept and the approach of management science has really flourished. Now, obviously, when we are discussing this management science approach, we are talking about some of its advantages, and first advantage, which we can easily identify, is that this approach can accurately and quickly solve complex problems. We have already seen that those problems which involve many variables, which involve huge data, can be solved by using management science approach. And as I already mentioned, the advent in software technology, the advances in computer technology are further augmenting the use of management science approach. Management science approach is now heavily used in the management of hospitals, in the management of operation theaters, in the management of vital statistics, on the basis of which we see the World Bank or other organizations publishing vital stats, the World Human Development Reports, the World Economic Reports. They're all based on the assimilation, on the collection of information, and then doing sophisticated analysis on that information so that it gets converted into useful information and knowledge. But like any other notion in management, and like any other concept in management, the concept of management science approach has its problems as well. It is not that management science approach is totally free of problems, and I will give you some problems, some practical problems from where you can understand that if this approach is applied blindly or if this approach is applied without proper insight or without properly making a purpose in your mind, then this can really harm you. For example, we are used to of applying for credit in the banks. All of us do that. And we don't really know on what basis the banks give us. Sometimes they approve our applications and sometimes they decline it. The credit rating scoring, which is used by banks, is actually based on many variables which are put in the computer, like the previous credit history of this person, the income potential of this person, the number of dependents which this person has, some other properties if he has, maybe some more cars or maybe more houses, some other liabilities which he is incurring or which he has incurred. So, and also many other variables. And the computer is obviously not a human being. It can fail you by half mark without considering that this failure of half mark is going to harm the bank rather than benefiting it. We as teachers, I as teacher, frequently encounter this problem, that if I leave all my final result of a course to a computer, the computer will add quizzes and midterms and presentations and this and that, whatever instruments of assessment I have used, it will add them up, give me a total number, and if I give it further instructions, it will give me a letter grade as well. Now, if I leave all to a computer, I check the quizzes, I enter the class participation marks in isolation, I enter the midterm marks, the final term marks, and then I leave it to computer to give grades to people. Will that be fair? Now, in a way, you can say yes, but what if a very deserving student, a student who is on a dean's list, is missing A+ in my course by 1 mark? Will the computer be smart enough to understand this and add an extra mark so that the brilliant student is not actually deprived of a dean's honors list or a gold medal? Obviously, computer cannot do it. So if I am not giving a 1 extra mark to that person, I might deprive him of a gold medal. Not me, but my computer can deprive him of a gold medal because I did not use my subjective human judgment. And similarly, very similarly, a student is failing by 1 mark. And my computer is a machine, it does not understand that when a student fails in a university, he has to reappear in that exam, he has to re-register for that exam, he has to spend a whole semester for that particular course. That means spending 3.5 months extra, that means delaying your job by 3.5 months, that means delaying the start of your life by 3.5 months. Can a computer understand that? No. So, one of the failures or one of the problems of management science approach is that it is too objective. It does not have any emotions. It does not have any feelings. And this, we cannot say that, like we claim in judiciary, that the justice is blind, which means it does not see emotions, it only looks at evidence. Fine. But what about the making or breaking of a student's career? Or the other example of credit scoring of banks, where a person who desperately needs loan has failed the credit score by 0.5 point and the bank has declined him loan purely based on this decision. That is a bit, to me, not a bit, but that is unfair. We have to have the management science approach coupled with human judgment, coupled with human perceptions, coupled with human sensitivity, so that our decisions do not lack sensitivity and they do not appear very harsh and mechanistic decisions. So this is definitely one of the issues. It is not a problem that cannot be solved. It can be solved if this is taken into account and if this is thought that computers are not smarter than the person who is using them. But if we rely on machines and computers more than we rely on our own ability, then obviously problems will arise. Now, another point which needs to be understood, because we are talking about the inability of quantitative data to always correctly come up with solutions, especially those solutions which concern human feelings and human beings. And we have already seen that quantitative data might be very extensive. It might be huge, but it is not rich. Because if quantitative data was rich, then there would have been no need for gathering richness through qualitative research. Then, because qualitative research is very difficult to conduct, focus groups, consumer panels, one-to-one interviews, and host of other qualitative research techniques, the unobtrusive research, the content analysis, they are very difficult and time-consuming and subjective techniques. But they are required because they add the element of richness in your analysis, because quantitative data cannot give you that richness. Because quantitative data does not convey tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge which is in our minds cannot be conveyed through a survey. If I rank a product, whether I like it or not, on a scale of from 1 to 7, I might rank it 3, but that 3 does not exactly tell the other person what do I mean when I say that I like this I somewhat like this product. What do I mean by that? So, in order to get the real reason why I am saying I like this product somewhat, why I am not saying that I love this product or I hate this product, to know that, we need to talk to that person. We need to elicit that information through tacit ways, which quantitative data cannot do. So it is fine for hitting targets, for sinking vessels, for hosts of other things where the only the mechanical or the civil or the electrical problems are involved, it is fine. But when it involves human beings, then we cannot always rely on it. We cannot program the performance of individuals on a computer. We can take help of many performance appraisal softwares available. Many performance management system softwares are available. We can take help. But we cannot expect them to give us exactly the sort of rich information which we know because we have observed that person throughout the year. We remember his achievements, we remember his failures, we know the reasons behind his failures, we know his family condition, we know his emotional state of his mind, which the computer does not know, which the quantitative data does not know. Therefore, the richness of the information is not purely conveyed through quantitative data. That is one failure, is that it treats people impersonally. There is a touch of impersonality in this analysis. It is cold and cruel. And the other one is that it does not really convey the feelings and richness. Because in the nutshell, we can say that it is the man behind the gun who is going to decide whether the data which is being presented to solve a problem is appropriate or not. We can give computers or other calculating machines loads of data which is useless. They can in turn, they'll provide us output which is useless. You must have heard the famous saying that garbage in, garbage out. So if we are putting garbage in the computer, computer is not a smart machine, it does not have intelligence like us. It can assimilate things, it can do it very quickly. It might be a very quick machine, but it is not an intelligent, smart machine. So it will analyze what we will give it. It will not add anything from its own. That is a limitation which some of us forget when we are making decisions purely based on computer analysis or purely based on scorings which are done again by quantitative methods. So we take that subjectivity out of our analysis, which sometimes kills the very purpose of that analysis. A consumer satisfaction survey, for example, if just done and recorded through ticking some boxes and ticking some Likert scale, will not exactly tell us why consumers are not satisfied with our hotel or restaurant. So that why part, which is so essential to know by businesses, because they want to get close to their customers. And surveys and questionnaires will tell them where their customers are, can tell them about their demography, can tell them about their income levels, can tell them about their jobs and occupations in which they are engaged, can tell them where they live, where they are located, but will not tell them why they use your product or why they don't use your product. For that, you need to have psychographic information. And psychographic information is not going to come alone from quantitative data collection. Psychography will involve that you know the lifestyle of your customers. You know what time do they watch TV, why do they watch this channel, why do they read this magazine, why do they not read this magazine, why do they read this newspaper, why do they wear this. We need to ask these things from them. And asking is eliciting qualitative response. When we mix this qualitative response with the quantitative information which we have already gathered, then we give ourselves and our organization a chance to make a correct decision. But if we rely solely on quantitatives, then we are taking the richness and the quality out of our own decision making, which means the quality of our decision making will be lacking. And if the quality of our decision making is lacking, then the performance of our organization will also be lacking. We will continue talking about the other approaches in the next session to come. Till then, it is Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.